good to go.
All right. Our scripture lesson this morning is from Isaiah chapter 6, the first 8 verses, Isaiah's famous temple vision. And we were thinking Sunday that it is a good time to be a Houston Astros fan. They have defeated the Yankees thoroughly, and we'll be going to the World Series. It starts in a couple days. I have a friend who is a huge Houston Astros fan. He follows them religiously. He knows the win-loss record, the batting order, the current batting averages, and he knows the ERAs of all the pitchers. He can tell you who the Astros will be playing and what days in the coming week. He follows them religiously. He knows, he cares, it matters to him. He is dedicated. But isn't it funny how we use the word religious and religiously today? My friend and colleague, Dr. Jeff Kripal, and I were talking just a few years ago at the Rothko Chapel at St. Thomas University. And he talks about and writes about the religion of no religion. And we all know that church attendance has been down for quite a few years, especially among youth. They lack interest in what they call organized religion, yet many are interested in the related topics, at least enough to pass the class. He urges me not to be cynical with our youth, because they are stretching out, trying to find their place in the world, searching for something to believe. Well, that's good and healthy. There are usually good intentions there. And in their rejection of religion, Jeff says that they are religious in their rejection of religion, many of them. The common phrase you hear these days, I'll bet you've heard it, is for people to say, oh, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. The religious tradition of the church, they figure, is old hat. That's all those rules and the no-nos, the moms and dad's church and Bible study. That's their stuff. That's their generation. And kids want to rebel against that stuff. A bunch of adults looking over your shoulder, if you will. I was sitting at a conference not too long, and a young woman, the student, came to sit next to me, and we were discussing, and she used that phrase. She knew I was clergy as well, and she says, oh, Dr. Mason, you're religious, but I'm spiritual. You see the point? That somehow she was better than me. Well, take that phrase. People talk about spirituality, and I asked this young woman to explain to me or characterize this spirituality that she claimed. And she said that she loved to go to the beach at sunrise and see the sun come up. And I asked her, well, she also said she liked to walk through the forest after a fresh rainfall. She liked to, as they say, bliss out watching a waterfall. And I couldn't help but think that as she did these things, it's a very convenient, handy thing that while you're doing that, no one passes you a collection plate. And you don't have to do it if you don't want to. You can make the experience last as long or as short as you want to. It's all very convenient. You schedule it, you do it if and when you feel like it. 7 or 8 times a year, she says, I can commune with the divine all by myself. I don't need a church building, people marching around in robes, lighting candles, annual fund drives, etc. When they do it their way, this young woman, they presume that spirituality will just settle upon their shoulder lightly like a butterfly. And I thought, well, maybe, but then it can just up and leave just as easily and quickly. And this young woman thought that she controlled the spirit. And her spirituality, when it worked for her schedule, it didn't really cost her hardly anything in time, money, or effort. Yeah. It's like the lady on the old Saturday Night Live skits. She would say, oh, you're not religious or spiritual? How convenient. Let's be real here for a moment. Now, I'm talking to grown-ups, I presume. Talking to you as a mature Christian person. You know what I know. If you are mature in the faith, you know that a true spirituality takes discipline, takes repetition. It does not happen overnight or when it's convenient for you and your schedule. The Christian faith does involve spirituality, but it does have a structure to it, but it is an evolving process. It is not a static, one-shot experience. It certainly wasn't for Isaiah. The temple vision that he had, read the whole book of Isaiah this afternoon if you can, and what you will find is that there is not just one prophet Isaiah writing here. There are 3 distinct voices writing. Not just the famous, magnificent temple vision in chapter 6. It takes discipline. It takes sacrifice. It also takes an openness to change. You see, the Christian faith is all about transformation, and usually that transformation takes time and patience, and let's face it, patience is not given to youth. Sometimes you just have to wait, like it or not. So in practical terms, why go to church? Well, I say that more than any other institution, the church opens doors for us, but we need to walk through that door into whatever is next in life. Walking through that open door, that part is up to us. Would you believe that there was a Gallup poll just a few years ago, and they asked a very simple question. The question was, did you go to church in the last 7 days? Amazingly, the answer didn't match up with the statistics. More people said they went to church than actually would be borne out by the statistics of average attendance in the churches of America. Gallup could not figure out what had happened. Finally, he concluded that many people actually felt like they had been in church, even though they hadn't been there. Martin Marty worked out, famous church historian, worked out a tongue-in-cheek paraphrase of a possible answer given to one of the pollsters who knocked at the door of the home. The home owner answered the question by saying something like this: well, I wasn't actually there in church, but I intended to be there so put me down as a yes. But you see, when it comes to church attendance, good intentions are not enough. When you joined your church, we promised God that we would be there. We promised God that attending church regularly would be a top priority in our lives and in our schedules. Some of the early church leaders called it a holy habit. A holy habit. And they were onto something, because going to church is a habit. And listen, not going to church is a habit too. We have found that over the last 2 years with our COVID experience. Not going to church becomes a habit. That's why those early Christians encouraged us to cultivate the holy habit of making church attendance a top priority. That's why we have reaffirmed that vow with every new member who joins. But let me ask you something. How are you doing now? How are you doing in your church attendance? How faithful are you really in supporting the church with your presence? That's P-R-E-S-E-N-C-E. Were you there? Let me put that in perspective by asking you some questions. If your car would not start 1 out of 3 times, would you consider it faithful? If your television worked 60% of the time, would you consider it faithful? If your water heater should greet you with cold water 3 mornings a week, would you consider it faithful? If you should fail to come to work 5 or 6 days each month, would your employer consider you to be faithful? If you should miss a couple of house payments in a year, would your mortgage holder say, oh, well, 10 out of 12 months, that's not too bad? If you attend church once or twice a month, 25% or 50% of the time, would you say, honestly, that you are faithful? It's something to think about, isn't it? Now, with all of this as a backdrop for our thinking, let me give you a list of 3 reasons why we go to church. 3 reasons for going to church that explode out of our text for today in Isaiah chapter 6. In this powerful story, we see Isaiah experiencing the very presence of God in the temple in a life-changing way. And out of that experience, he senses 3 dramatic things. A closeness to God, a compassion for people, and a call for ministry. That is precisely what worship does for us. It draws us closer to God. It gives us a compassion for other people. It calls us to ministry. We'll take a look at these together one at a time. First of all, going to church draws us closer to God. I believe that's true. Isaiah came to church that day and he had one of those mountaintop experiences with God. An experience much too powerful to express in words, an experience that drew him closer than ever to God. Put that over against this. Do you remember how in the New Testament, right after the miracle of Easter, the risen Lord appeared to the disciples in the upper room, and they were absolutely bowled over by this incredible experience of seeing with their own eyes the resurrected Christ. He had defeated sin and death, the most amazing miracle of all time, the greatest news of all time, and together as a church family, the disciples all experienced it, all that is except Thomas. Thomas missed it for one reason and one reason only. He wasn't there. It was absent. Now we know in his grace and compassion the risen Lord came back and appeared again later just for Thomas. Doubting Thomas, by the way. But it's a haunting story, isn't it? There's a sermon there somewhere, and I think it has to do with this. How many great moments with God have you missed? How many life-changing moments with God have you missed? It's simply because you were not there. Simply because you were absent from church. And simply because you haven't really made up your mind yet to commit your life to God and to church. All right, second, going to church gives us compassion for other people. In church that day, Isiah became concerned about the people. He wanted to reach out and help them. Church at its best makes us more compassionate people. Did you know that people who go to church regularly are happier and more satisfied than those who don't? Regular churchgoers live longer, a new study has revealed. Think of that. Going to church adds years to your life and life to your years. Regular churchgoers are more loving, more generous, more caring, more gracious, more moral, more honest, more accepting of others. And they are less prejudiced, more committed to family life, and more involved in working and serving out in the community to improve the quality of life for everybody, and especially for the less fortunate. Why is that? It's because no institution in the world teaches love and compassion like the church does. Remember that famous Mother Teresa quote? Someone asked her how she could find the strength to work daily with all these needy people in India. She answered, and I quote, "I look into their faces and I see the eyes of Christ." So you learn that, well, where else? In church. The church teaches us to see every person we meet as Christ in disguise. The church teaches us that we are not isolated Christians. We are family. Third and finally, going to church, and I'm not talking about watching church on TV, but going to the church physically, it calls us to ministry, it calls us to serve. That too happened to Isiah that day long ago. There in church, he felt the tug of God. He realized that a prophet was needed for that time, and he said, "Here am I, Lord, send me." On a Friday night a few years ago, I went to a high school football game, and while sitting there in the stands, I had a strange thought. Imagine this. You go to a football game. 50 players huddle up with their 3 coaches. Suddenly the referee blows his whistle to start the game, and a crazy thing happens. The 50 players stand there on the sideline, and the 3 coaches run out on the field to play the game. Some of the players shout encouragement. "Go get him, coach. Put it on him, coach. You can do it." But none of the players go out on the playing field. They expect the coaches to do it all. Now, if you saw that at a football game, what would you think? You'd probably think, "This is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen." And yet that's the way some people relate to the church. They think the ministers and the staff are supposed to do it all, while they stand by and watch. That is certainly not biblical. Think about it. Jesus did not call a single priest or rabbi to be one of his disciples. He called lay people to help him do his work. And listen, he is calling you right now. He has a special job that only you can do. Can you hear his call? And can you say with Isaiah, "Here am I, Lord, send me"? Finally, in Isaiah chapter 6, there is no temple vision unless he was inside the church. And I mean specifically the sanctuary, as we are in now, most of us. You see, the good things, the amazing things can happen in this very room and out in the community. So let's be here.